Hello everybody and welcome to this third episode to the Guide to Formula One. In this episode, I'll be looking at the drivers, the athletes which drive the immensely fast cars. And speaking of the cars, if you haven't seen the previous episode, go take a look at that. And the first episode, talking about the basics, will also help you understand what I'll be discussing in this episode. So, let's get started. Unlike other sports, the driver is only half the athlete. In football or in basketball, the athlete is what makes the game. But here, the athlete is so heavily dependent on the car that they're only half of what makes Formula One engaging. Many people think that they just sit there and turn a wheel, but it's so much more. The G-forces that they experience cannot be compared with anything else. They're more than an astronaut, more than a fighter jet pilot. And they're unlike anything we've ever experienced. They reach up to 4 to 5 Gs, and this means that they can weigh 4 to 5 times their body weight. They're no ordinary human beings, but they're athletes that push their bodies to the absolute limits. So what makes a good driver, and what makes a talented driver? So the physical aspect is one of the main points which makes a driver so special. An F1 driver on a regular day will experience around 3 to 4 Gs and sometimes increasing to 5, depending on the track. And they're not doing this one time. They're doing this throughout a whole race, throughout a whole qualifying session, throughout practice sessions, for 3 days in a row. And that's an immense strain on your neck, on your heart, on the different parts of your body. These G-forces mean that their neck can weigh 3 to 5 times what it originally weighs. And considering that they're wearing a heavy helmet and a neck brace, this can all increase to up to 35 kilos. While under these conditions, the driver has to manage to steer the car, think about the strategy, communicate with the team, think about his opponents, think about passing, and a lot more. Any ordinary human being would pass out in this situation. Although the cars have power steering, it would be physically impossible to drive this car without muscular strength. You might be able to turn the wheel 1 time, 2 times, but you have to cope with this throughout the whole race, and that can last up to 2 hours. So they're muscular without being bulky, and they have a very strong neck and also very strong legs. Their concentration, hand-eye coordination are in a league of their own, and the reaction times are also very fast. And this is necessary to adapt to different situations which the drivers find themselves in throughout a race. When having to pass, they have to cope with the different racing line and the different way around the track, which I'll be touching on in a later episode as well. In a crash of around 250 kilometers per hour, you're likely to decelerate by 26 Gs. That means that you weigh 26 times your body weight, and this would kill any other human being. So that just shows how trained these drivers really are, because they undergo crash after crash and often just step out of the car safely. It's equivalent to having 5 fire extinguishers strapped to your head and neck for over 2 hours and then still having to drive a car. Now that's pretty impressive. Their heart also has to be strong because it's a constant physical endurance, and nothing except a full marathon gets heart rates as high as Formula One. They often peak at around 220 BPM, but they sit around an average of 180 to 200 BPM. So leg strength. Formula One drivers have to have very strong legs as well, as in order to fully press the brake pedal, they have to apply around 80 kilos of pressure. And that's like pushing 100 bags of sugar. Now you might think, oh, I'll do that. Well, you might be able to push them over once, twice, even maybe 10 times if you'd like. But keep in mind that these tracks have a lot of corners, can go up to 15 corners, and that means 15 times braking, if not more. And if you have to apply this pressure for over 15 times in 1 lap, and sometimes that can go up to 70 laps, that is an insane amount of pressure which you have to apply every time. The cabin they're sitting in is around 50 to 60 degrees Celsius, and you might be able to sit in that for a while, but try to run a marathon in that temperature. I can guarantee you would fall over at the end. Besides all these physical abilities which the driver has to have, there's also an aspect of talent which comes into play. And this is very clearly seen in drivers such as Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. Lewis has been in the sport for a very, very long time and has won over 6 drivers' championships, which is almost the world record. But they have a certain talent which you don't see very often. And it's a sense of control which they have over the car, a sense of knowledge and feel for the car, how they can relay that information to the team to help them improve the car. But also their ability to adapt to the situation, to the weather if it rains, different grip, and to adapt and to overtake other cars. How do you get into an F1 seat? Well, the career for an F1 driver is relatively complicated, and it's hard to get into one of these 20 seats. As in many sports like football, there's 11 players in a team, and there's hundreds of professional football teams in the world. But these are 20 seats that you can get into worldwide, that's it. So how do you get into one of these 20 seats? Well, sponsorships are a large part of F1 as well, as there's a lot of money that goes around in Formula 1. If you're a driver and you have a sponsor with you, then that sponsor might be willing to invest money into the team that will buy you. That makes you more attractive for that team. But generally these drivers start with around the age of 6 or 7 and complete approximately 5 years of professional go-karting. And what this does is it gives them the initial feel for a car, for racing line, for tracks, for corners, for battling with your opponent. Thereafter, it requires a lot of simulator training and practice to master each track, and they have to stand out from their competitors early on in their career. And generally, if you're talented, you continue on to Formula 3, Formula 2, maybe IndyCar, which is less likely. If you're in Formula 2, chances are that a Formula 1 team might scout you as a talent, and one of their driver academies might promote you into an F1 team. So for example, the Ferrari Driver Academy has a lot of drivers in different leagues, but for example, one of their drivers, Mick Schumacher, is in Formula 2. They can place him in a Ferrari team, such as Haas, Ferrari, or Alfa Romeo. The driver market changes a bit every year, although generally there's not that much changes as drivers sign contracts for longer periods of time. But you do see that every year there's some new faces in F1 or some switches in teams. So at the moment, there's a variety of drivers. There's some young talents such as Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, Alexander Albon, and George Russell. And Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc being the 2 biggest talents amongst these drivers. And you can see that they're also in the best teams, Red Bull and Ferrari respectively. And then there's some more experienced drivers like Lewis Hamilton, Daniel Ricciardo, Kimi Raikkonen, and they've completed more years in the sport. And some of them have won drivers' championships, like Lewis Hamilton, who's won 6. Some haven't, like Daniel Ricciardo, but they have a lot of experience, and this experience is considered to teams when purchasing a driver, as they can help develop the car further. So that concludes this episode about the drivers. I hope that you now understand a bit about the second half of the athlete in the sport. Many people would say that it should be more about the drivers than it should be about the cars. But I think that the cars and the engineering aspect of the sport is part of what makes it special and different to other sports. But it's also what makes it fun to watch, as the athlete has half of what can happen in their control. The next episode, we'll be talking about the tracks, where does F1 race, how does the track work, and how can this lead to your strategy. And that'll be the episode after that as well. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.